Hey, welcome back to Behind the Why. Before we do anything else today, I want to invite you, please, go down and hit the subscribe button, hit the little bell so that we can make sure that you're getting the information as we put it out for you. Help get that conversation started and keep it going. Also, we have a Patreon account if you'd like to just support us in what we're doing here. And we have an Instagram account where you can stay in touch. So many different ways for us to stay in touch with you and keep this conversation going. Today, being our 30th podcast, it kind of feel like I'm coming over the top of a hill a little bit, but we're going to be talking about identity politics. I want you to join us again here in Behind the Why. This is the Ray Ellis Podcast. Let's get behind the why. We're going to do something a little different today, being this is our 30th podcast, as I said a moment ago. And we're going to be talking today about identity politics.
Politics. I hate those politics. Oh.
Identity politics. Get all that out before breakfast. But we're going to look at a quick video here by a representative out of Georgia to kind of set the stage. So join us as we watch this video together.
Hello, America. This is State Representative Vernon Jones from the great state of Georgia. You know, the Democratic Party has demonstrated that they don't give a damn about black people. Yes, I said it. They don't give a damn about black people. If you look over the past several years, their number one concern has been illegal immigrants. What they've done is they've completely ignored and left behind the most loyal and dedicated block of voters, the black vote. Now, you know it, and I know it too. As a matter of fact, if you don't believe me, ask Diddy, the rapper. He just recently called out the Democratic Party and Joe Biden, and he said, no more free votes, no more taking us for granted. You have to earn our votes. Now, America, I want you to stay with me for a moment. I want you to remove all the R's and all the D's and just think for a moment. Donald J. Trump has done more for black people and the black community than any other president in modern times. For one, Joe Biden wrote the crime bill that incarcerated masses of black people and separated them from their families with no sanctuary cities or jails. Donald Trump passes the First Step Act that started to release thousands of those same black men and women so they can reunite with their families, get a second chance, and live like the American dream has promised them to. Now, historical black colleges. The previous administration had cut funding for historical black colleges, and Donald J. Trump has come back and literally not only restored those funds, but literally wrote it into law, where now black college presidents do not have to come up to Congress year in and year out to beg for money to be put in the federal budget. It's written into law. Lastly, opportunity zone districts. Those districts are designated for areas that are blighted, which a lot of them are black communities. They need revitalization. This helps them to get into revitalization and restoration of those communities and improve the quality of life. Now, stay woke. The liberal, left, radical, socialist part of the Democratic Party, they are afraid and terrified of independent thinking black men and women.
Snaps.
That is about as good a segue as we can get as far as transition to this topic of identity politics. One of the things that has just been a bane to me, it's been confusing to me, is this willingness that we have had in this country to be segmented into little groups and made to fight against each other.
Right.
And that to me is the epitome of this identity politics. You know, it's just united we stand, divided we fall.
Right.
Until it comes to politics for some reason. Then we can be as united as we want. It makes no sense at all.
Right.
So again, welcome everybody to Behind the Why, and we just want to use that as kind of a launching pad to get us started today. You know, back in the 1970s, I think the lady name was, I'm not sure if she goes by doctor, but Barbara Smith, involved in the civil rights movement and other things like that. A feminist in her own right. She is considered or what's the word I'm looking for? Identifies a person who kind of came up with this idea of identity politics. Yeah. And in her own words, she describes that more of being this idea that we're going to take this group, females, and then, gay females, and we're going to put their interests together in this one group, and then we're going to use that to bring a highlight on women's issues in America.
Right.
And so in principle, it sounds really grand, except for, like I said, it's one of those things like it's not the reality of the world. It pits one against the other, where we're both sitting in the same canoe. I'm shooting holes in your side of the boat and telling you how bad your boat's leaking, and we're all going to drown. So identity politics, let's roll that out. Let's go with it.
One thing that came to mind, we were talking about this the other day, right? Especially with identity politics, you had asked, like, when we say identity politics, what comes to your mind? And I immediately think straight back to critical race theory.
Yes.
Obviously, because I wrote a thesis on it and I can't get the thing out of my mind. Maybe in the next couple of years, I'll be like a break. But because really the whole point, when I think identity politics, I immediately go to this like intersectional type idea, right? Where it's like you said, and it really was founded with like the feminists and then like the gay identity, and then if you're black gay feminist, like, oh my gosh, look at all those intersections. But it becomes so pitted against like these individual characteristics of people.
Right.
But to the point where, at least what I see in a lot of things I read, it's like, okay, all the people who are classified as minority and oppressed in any way, let's be allies and join together, and then we can destroy the foundations that we see as a problem: patriarchy, America in general, Christianity,
even to the
these
point of
things.
Self-destruction. That's what I mean by us sitting in this little canoe together. We're in the middle of the lake, and we're we're maybe 100 yards from shore, and the water's deep and everything, and it's cold, and yet I'm sitting here blowing holes in your side of the boat and yelling at you, and you're shooting holes in my side of the boat, and we're saying, look, you got more holes than I got, and my holes are bigger, your holes. And at the same time, it's like everybody's going down. And it makes no sense. And it's stupid. It's stupid.
One thing, though, that encourages me, and I love the video, Vernon Jones, and he's been posting more of just like his thought process. He even said, he's like, I've been a lifelong Democrat. But he started thinking and really looking at facts and seeing like, wait a minute. And I have to credit it to this whole crisis in America, the corona, because people have really shown their colors, and but it's causing people to see things. And there's just so many things that are just like surfacing right now. With Joe Biden and his sexual assault allegation, and then how all the people who cared about Rose McGowan.
Rose McGowan has been torching him.
Let me say, though.
Oh, my gosh.
Let me say, and this is what I was getting to with that, because when I saw Rose McGowan, I'm like, wow, okay, she's not all the way woke, okay, but she's getting there. And I was like, yes, keep thinking, keep looking, and she's dissatisfied with the Republican Party. She thinks Trump is also a slime person. And I'm like, okay. But she's starting to look at her own party, and she's like, wait a minute.
You guys are doing none
She's
of the
like,
things
they don't care.
At all.
She put a blast on Planned Parenthood for oppressing women. I'm like, oh.
How could you not be oppressing women when you're using them to get rich at the destruction of their lives? When you know that what the abortion industry does to females. And it's like, how
and
can
she
you
was a
not?
part of the whole like Me Too camp, right? With Kavanaugh and everything. And I'm like, man, the girl's thinking.
Because see, what happened is that in the Kavanaugh, it sounds like this great big righteous movement, right? Because you're going to get this guy, and everybody's so emotional, nobody's thinking. And then you stop and you say, okay, what if that was me and they were coming after me and didn't have to obey the rule of law? I was not innocent until proven guilty. You could prosecute me, persecute me, destroy my family, destroy my friends with no repercussions against you. All of a sudden, it's not so funny when it's coming back at you. And so now I see with this young lady who has made this allegation against Joe Biden. And the thing that makes this so atrocious is that this is not something that happened last week. This is something that they knew all along. And it just piled up on top of everything else. And so with this allegation coming out, and with the voice of this young lady's mother speaking from the grave when she called to Larry King and said, hey, my daughter did it, and they ostracized my daughter. And then we see these people saying, yeah, that did happen to her. And now everybody wants to act like, oh, Joe Biden is a great guy. He didn't do any of these things. And I say that not because I want to destroy Joe Biden. I think Joe Biden is who he is. But the fact that these are the exact same swords,
who were willing to like kill Kavanaugh,
that they dug for someone else.
Right.
Now, as the Bible says, they're falling into it. They've dug this pit for everybody else, and they're the one falling into it. And we see this time and time again. And you mentioned that this crisis is forcing people's opinion to the surface. And we see that. We see that now. We're seeing, okay, we're going through this time where America is being restricted. And part of our sickness, this crazy thinking that we allow ourselves to indulge in, it comes from our affluenza. We're so profitable with such a good position. We can talk about stupid stuff.
Right. Well, even who was? I think it was Candace Owens, and I'm not sure if it was her original thought or if she was speaking from maybe like other thinkers as well. But she was talking about some of the issues, right, that people have, especially like a younger generation, millennial generation. She's like, that's just a privilege.
It's all it is.
Like, you're all privileged because you have the luxury to complain about the stupidest things, right? About when it comes down to issues of identity often. I feel like I'm being oppressed because of identity. And it's like, okay, you have food, you can get a job.
Right.
Like, these are first world problems, yo. Like, you don't have this in another place.
This is a product of the blessing of God on this nation.
For real.
And
it is.
It's
a blessing.
And we take that and we start to fuss and complain about made up stuff.
Well, it makes me think back to the the president of, was it Uganda? When he was being interviewed about gay rights.
Yes.
And he's like, my people do not care. Like, they do not care.
But I think you should really just bring the... No, in our country, we have voted this way, and this is how it...
He's like, we do not care.
He didn't want to go there. He's like, no, we're not getting into it.
I just thought it was so funny. I'm like,
don't you think you should be ashamed?
He's like, nope.
Nope, I do not feel ashamed. This is what our people said. No.
Yeah. but even then, he was saying the important thing is, he said, I am here to represent my constituents.
Yes.
And they do not want gay rights. And it was like, oh my gosh.
And it's funny. What's funny about that is that we come to this whole discussion, and it's about representative government.
Right.
And yet we have a country that we're living in today where we're seeing more and more and more where our representatives represent themselves and their little group of people.
Right.
And we've talked about this before, how a person can go into Congress with relatively no net worth, no skills, no nothing, and 20 years later still there, and they're worth $25 million, $50 million. And you're going, how
did this happen?
How does that happen? It's like a pastor of a church who's a millionaire and he's got people in his congregation who's barely getting by. It makes no sense.
Also, another thing that doesn't make sense when you think about you think soberly about things, right? And someone had tweeted out this morning about, I guess Oprah is going to start this raising money for Corona, right? And all these celebrities getting together to get people to donate money. And it's like, okay, that's great. But also, like, this person said, don't you find it funny? It's always the millionaires and billionaires asking for your money.
Exactly. It's the
when
whole...
they have a lot.
I mean,
it's like, yeah, it is kind of funny.
In one check, you could do more than all of us with our $5 and $10 bills.
Especially when all those people
just write a check.
aren't working right now or something.
Write a check.
It's kind of funny.
Shut up. Write a check.
Right.
It's put your money where your mouth is.
Right.
Again.
And I'm not saying they're not donating themselves, but it's just like...
I'm saying they're not donating themselves.
I don't know. I don't know if they aren't. I don't know.
I just think, come on, people, do it.
Right.
Get up and do it. And I know I sort of this is tongue in cheek.
Oh yeah.
But however, the reality is you have much more capital power than the rest of us combined. Do it. If you really want to see it done, make it happen. But we are too often. As long as we're talking about pop industry, let me quote the king of pop: "If you want to make the world a better place,
look at yourself.
Look at yourself
and make the change.
Make a change."
That's true.
That's what I'm saying. You got to do it. You got to do right. You got to just do those things. And identity politics makes you stupid.
Right.
I was thinking about Dr. Ben Carson. One of the most brilliant men of our generation. And at a different time and place, if he was Democrat, for instance, he would be he would be lauded.
Oh, they would name universities after him. Streets.
If you haven't seen the movie, you can probably watch it on Netflix. Kubi Jr.
Gifted Hands.
Yeah, Gifted Hands.
It's about him. Yeah.
Starred in the movie of his life, Gifted Hands. Just this remarkable brain surgeon, first man to successfully separate conjoined twins by the head. To do it successfully, just a phenomenally
under a lot of pressure too.
Yeah.
I was like watching the movie. I'm like, is he gonna make it in time?
And this whole thing with identity politics, how it's about removing the obstacles and the hardships. He has this quote. Dr. Ben Carson has this quote. Says, "What's the guy's name at Microsoft? What's his name?"
Bill Gates.
Bill Gates. He goes, even Bill Gates had obstacles. I'm like, duh, yes. Even Bill Gates had obstacles. That was a quote by Dr. Carson. He was talking. I was like, that just makes so much sense, is that we want to go through all this trouble of removing obstacles in our life. Like, that makes us better. It doesn't. It makes you weak.
Like we were talking about,
weak.
We were talking about the other day about people who like just get by, right?
Yes.
They seem to just like kind of skate through different situations. And I remember growing up and looking at them and being like, no fair. Like, you're just getting through, right? Like, it's no fair. But then, like you said, you're like, no, but things tend to catch up to people.
Real life happens.
Whether it's, an obstacle in their work as an adult, and they realize, shoot, like, I shouldn't have been lazy back then because I'm paying for it now. And so it's like, you get by, but you really don't get away with it. And there's always obstacles for everybody.
Everything. The obstacle is what makes you stronger.
Right. And that's what I was trying to get to.
That's where all the jokes and the memes coming from now. When you see all the people come to after quarantine, all fat, because you haven't been doing anything. You haven't been exercising, you haven't been working, you haven't been doing anything, excuse me. And so it's the obstacle that causes us to work against the resistance of life.
Right.
And when we sit back in our position of affluence now, because we got all these blessings, we want to do less, we want to play. There's this new thing now about this extended childhood, where they were talking about the emerging adult doesn't start till he's 30. In what world? In what world do you get to be a child till you're 30 years old?
Well, and it's not like a new development. It's been around,
no.
But it says, emerging adulthood between the ages of 18 to 29. And it's only found, they said, in industrial and post-industrial societies.
It only happens in countries where you are rich. That's the bottom line.
Yes.
Because in a lot of countries today, 90% of the world today, by the time you're 10 or 12 years old, you're working to support the family.
Right. By 16, you're an adult. Like,
yeah, you're working to support the family in this position
crazy,
of affluence, where we're able to sit back and have the luxury of education, where we can sit back and not have to feed and take care of ourselves, because we have all these supports, even from food, from breakfast to lunch, and I support all these things. But that position of affluence gives us this idea that as individuals, I have a right to play. I have a right to relax and do nothing.
It's even interesting, I think, about, in some ways, the way the university in the United States has, not every university, but the way it's set up, really caters to this emerging adulthood. And I think in some ways it's nice for people, especially like kids straight out of high school going to college away from home, and they don't have support, and they feel like, oh my gosh, what have I done? And so there's so many support things for them, but almost to the point where it's like,
know what we do when you kick them in the rear end and say, look here, get it done. That's what you do. You look at them and say, guess what? This is life. Welcome to the real world.
Give them a hug at least.
No, you turn around and smack them on the butt and say, go do what you got to do.
No, but it's so funny.
You're not a baby anymore, okay?
In a lot of these universities, I mean, they have like support groups for so many different things.
Oh gosh.
You got the dogs on campus. You have safe spaces.
I'm sorry.
Here's the funny thing about it.
Because I had a support group when I left home. I remember in my support group, they dressed us all alike, and they told us that if we stick together, we would have great success. Yeah, my Marine Corps DI was very supporting. Yes,
gave you little puppies to pet when you were hurting.
He petted me all right.
Right.
I can't remember the pets. Yeah,
and so it's like on the university.
Get up and do your job, young man.
And even I was thinking, there's always like safe spaces, and a lot of the professors will have it's like this triangle on their door, and it's like a rainbow, and it says this is a safe space.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, here's the thing about this. In the real world, there's not going to be safe spaces,
no space.
And that's the problem with it, where it's like, you're creating this like pseudo world, and and people think like, oh, this is the world. The university is what the life should really be like, in the sense where we have these deep discussions and
get paid for it and get to eat. You can do all those things, but you don't have the right to have other people take care of you while you do it.
Right.
And what I just keep going back to this thing. I keep hearing this identity politics, these concepts that's just. They're infiltrating the fabric of America.
Everywhere, though.
And I hear it so much. And then when I start hearing it in the church even, and I'm like, seriously, people? You want to substitute the gospel of Jesus Christ for identity politics. You want to substitute the gospel that says there's neither male nor female, Jew nor Greek, that we're all one in the body of Christ. You want to substitute that idea for, no, you're a black Christian, you're a yellow Christian, you're a red Christian, you're a brown Christian,
right.
You're a white Christian. And it's like, what? Where does this come from?
And then in the mix, I think it goes back to what Vernon Jones said, where people aren't thinking. Then we're just emoting. And so Jackie Perry.
Right.
I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with
yes,
her.
yes.
So she had recently tweeted out, and she was saying, she's like, I find it interesting that when I share my testimony about, because she's the one that wrote Gay Girl, Good God.
Right.
And she's like, when I talk about my testimony, they always say, evangelical Christians reach out and say, oh, you're so courageous for sharing your story. Thank you. Mm-hmm. She's like, but whenever I talk about politics, then I get messages saying, we're so disappointed. And then she was talking about, basically,
she's into the identity politics, though.
She is. And recently on Instagram, I saw she had shared suggestions of books people should read. And one of them was White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. And I'm like, as a Bible-believing Christian, which she is.
Mm-hmm. I've heard her talk.
And I've heard her testimony, and she's a
yeah.
Christian.
Mm-hmm.
She loves the Lord. But I'm like, why is she falling into this? And she's making it about color and that the blacks in America have it so bad, so hard. And I'm like, you're missing the point.
Right.
And I would love to have a conversation with her to really understand where she's coming from. I reached out. I was like, I know I probably won't, but it'd be so cool.
The whole point is that these people who are always talking about black oppression are not oppressed.
No.
They're making money hand over fist. They have platforms for expression. They have influence in the lives of people.
They're able to share their ideas.
So how are you this great
influence.
oppressed person? I don't understand. Like I said, we talked about this before. Back before the civil rights movement had his full work. And I don't think the civil rights movement will ever be done because people are always people.
Right.
But we see the civil rights movement of the 40s, 50s, and 60s coming to its fruition in the early 70s. There was no black millionaires in America in 1969. Then we had one or two. And now we have black billionaires and business owners. And we're like...
And once they get to that position, they keep saying, we have it so hard.
How are we so oppressed if we can have a black president?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't understand how we can have these two dynamics happening at the same time. And it's like, we stop thinking. It's like this brother was saying on the video. You have to stop and think.
And it really goes back to, because I thought this so many times, especially in grad school, sitting in classrooms and always talking about the oppression of people of color. And I'm like, this is interesting because I'm here and you look at me and you can tell that I'm not, only white. People are like, oh, she's mixed with something, right? And then there's other, Hispanic or something in my class. And I'm like, you're here in grad school too. Mm-hmm. How are we oppressed when we have this opportunity? We're in this small elite room, right? Kind of like, it's like, really? Really?
The whole thing just drives me batty because, especially when I hear black people playing the victim card, because I think about our ancestors who were slaves, who were brought here. They weren't immigrants, as some people like to say. They were slaves. They were brought here as chattel property, and they were at the base of society. And yet, even in that society, they heard the germs of freedom. And they're like, we are people. Mm-hmm. We have a right. And even in the deepest, darkest slave states, down in Alabama, Mississippi, Tennessee, places like that, Georgia, slaves were teaching themselves to read, teaching themselves how to do arithmetic, teaching themselves how to read the stars, how to navigate. They were learning. Why? Because they refused to be oppressed, refused to be that thing that someone called them. And then after the emancipation came along and slavery was outlawed, then they were still relegated to being second-class citizens. But there were those people like a Booker T. Washington, like a Dr. George Washington Carver, like a Frederick Douglass, who said, no, we will be more than the sum of what you think we are. Mm-hmm. And they strove to become better than that. They didn't come out and say, well, like Andrew Garvey, we're going to be going back to Africa, the Back to Africa movement with Andrew Garvey. No, these people say, no, America is our home.
Right.
Even this concept of being African American, this is something that really just, every time I hear it, it kind of strikes me as odd. I'm like, realistically speaking, guys, I may be a black American of African descent, but I'm not African American. If I go to Africa, I would be a foreigner. Do you understand? I don't share their customs or their culture. I don't. I know that may sound insulting to you, but understand that was another phrase that was a sociological creation back in the 70s, where I think it was some entertainer that first started referring to themselves as African American. They just took off and it became politically correct. Yeah. Before that, we were very proud to be black Americans.
Right.
I said to a young lady in school right before the end of the last school term, she came to my office and she was complaining about somebody using racial slurs against her. And I said, what happened? She said, this guy called me a Negro. And I said, you are a Negro. She goes, you can't say that. I said, you are a Negro. I said, sweetheart, don't let the truth hurt you, okay? You are a Negro. That's what you are. You can't say that. I said, what do you want me to say? I say, exactly. That's what you are. Mm-hmm. Negro is not a slur. That's what you are. Okay? African American, you are not. You don't have anything in Africa. I know this sounds sacrilegious. I know it does. But again, when I'm talking to my black friends and we're in a group of black people, we don't refer to ourselves as African American.
Because you've never been to Africa.
We don't. Only time it's African American is when it's politically advantageous or when you're talking out in front of people, then it's African. But black people don't refer to themselves, at least the ones I know. Mm-hmm. In my family, we don't refer to ourselves as African American because we've never been to Africa. Now, I've known some people who are from Africa. Mm-hmm. I've known some African Americans who were born in Africa and immigrated to America. Right. I know those people, but I'm not one of them. And so when we start,
and it's funny because if you're from South Africa and you're white and you live in America, you would still be African American, but we don't call them African American.
No, we call them white.
So it's like it doesn't make sense.
The only thing that's not legitimate in this country is white. You just white. You don't have any rules, any rules. But we look at all this stuff. I'm talking about this identity politics where we segment ourselves into little bitty pockets, and I go, how do we think that makes us stronger? Mm-hmm. Alloys are used because they're stronger than either one of the virgin metals. Mm-hmm. You blend them together because it gives you a strength that the two original or the parent metals don't have. Right. You make an alloy out of them because they're stronger. And so when we come together, yes, I'm not going to deny my blackness. Mm-hmm. And if you were a homosexual, I'm not telling you to. I believe that homosexuality is a sin as far as Christianity is concerned. I think it's a sin before God. But I'm not going to tell you to stop being who you are. As an individual person in this country, you have a right to live. You have that right to be a person in that regard. That all comes together to make us who we are. Mm-hmm. Now, if you come to me in the issue, we start talking about belief system. You say, do I believe homosexuality? I'm going to tell you the Bible says homosexuality is a sin. Mm-hmm. And I can tell you why the Bible says it's a sin. And I believe it is. But you have that choice as an individual. Mm-hmm. And I'm not going to hate on you because of that. Right. But neither am I going to elevate you because of that. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to give you more than say because of that. I'm not going to come to you as a female and say, because you are a woman, you don't have to pass the test. You can just have the position. Right. That makes everybody weaker.
Exactly.
That doesn't help
and that's
anything.
The thing we're getting to. It goes back to that shooting the hole in the boat, right?
Yes.
Because it's like we're going to keep lowering the standard. Because there are anatomical things, that just make a man different from a woman. Right. And you get a weaker society.
We see this, and I hope I didn't have this in my notes earlier, Ryan. I don't know if you can find it, but in the military in Israel, one of the things that in Israel that you have to join the military, mm-hmm. but women were restricted from joining into combat units. They weren't allowed to go in up until just recently. And then what they found in Israel, because of the liberal arm of that, they started saying, we want all these women to be involved in these combat units. So they said, okay, we're going to do it. But they found that women weren't able to pass the test at the same levels that the men were. Mm. So they kept lowering the standard. And then in the field, more soldiers were getting hurt. Right. They were getting hurt because they weren't physically up to the standard mm-hmm. that their male counterparts were. And it brought the proficiency for the entire unit down. And so we see that again. It's like, okay, now you will always have those exceptional females who are able to run and hang with the guys mm-hmm. because they are exceptional. I mean, if you have an average girl with an average guy, physically speaking, both of them physically mature, the guy's going to have physical capabilities that will outstrip her. Right. She will have things that she does that outstrips him, but it's just that's the way it works. Mm-hmm. Like, for instance, women carry the bulk of their strength in their lower body. Guys carry typical strength in the upper body, different things like that. Mm-hmm. And so those are just physiological characteristics. Right. And when we ignore those, we invite weaknesses. And like I said, there are some women I know that could hang with me on the best day, but they're exceptional females. Mm-hmm. They're not the average female. And so that's what we're talking about. And when we ignore those things, all we do is make fools of ourselves. And in this nation, we come up with all these ideas and reasons why we can do all this stuff where we fly in the face of just like the mantra of the civil rights movement, in the great speech from Dr. King, I have a dream that one day my children will live in a nation where they're not mm-hmm. judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. Today, we go to the exact opposite. Mm-hmm. Tell me, you're gay, or you're female, or you're short, or you're tall, or you're fat. And I'm going to make my whole judgment of you based on the fact of this external thing. I could care less about your character. It doesn't matter.
I remember the first time I started realizing,
it doesn't matter.
when I started realizing how silly we get when we get into the identity politics in every arena of life. It was, I still laugh about it because I was just like, really? Wow. It was this class I was taking, and the professor, it was like a guest speaker, and she was talking about some shows she was watching, and just normal conversation, she's like, yeah, and the main character's fat identified, and it's so great. And I was like, wait, that's a thing? I was like, that's a thing? Fat identified? Like,
that's what I mean. We're making it weaker, right? So now instead of telling people excessive weight is bad for you, it's stress on your joints, it's bad for your heart, instead of dealing with the reality,
like, I'm fat identified.
we're gonna shoot a hole in the boat. I got another hole in the boat. You can be fat if you want to. You go ahead. You got to exercise. Eat all that junk food. Go ahead. And it's like, we're making ourselves weaker.
But it's when I heard that in the class, I was like, so then I made a meme. It was so funny. Oh my gosh. With, the raptor with the thinking face. And I said, if I'm thin, or what did I say?
If I'm fat.
If I'm, what was it?
If I'm overweight.
If I'm thin, but I think I'm overweight, does that make me trans fat or something? I don't remember what it was, but
I remember reading that.
Oh my gosh.
But you think about those kind of things, that this whole idea is just flying up in the face of all the reality. And so now we have the thing like I say with Kavanaugh, where they were really ready to persecute this man, just destroy his whole life.
That was painful to watch.
Willing to lie and just, ignore the rule of law. And these are the lawmakers of this country.
That's what's scary about it.
Destroy the rule of law.
That's what's scary.
To get what they want. And now we see the same thing here happening up here with Biden now. These allegations come up and people are willing to ignore everything they said was so pertinent. I even saw a clip the other day where Hillary Clinton was talking about how wonderful Biden was. He's always been a champion of women's rights. I'm going, yeah, but we've seen her pull this amnesia thing before.
She's used to doing that.
Yeah, because, when her husband was going through this whole thing and the women that accused him, she all of a sudden forgot everything that Super Bill was doing. So
Super Bill.
So she has done this before. So we see this. But what that doesn't surprise me when people like Hillary Clinton does this, when Pelosi does this. It doesn't surprise me. But what surprises me is when normal, everyday people choose to be amnesiacs.
Well, even like Alyssa Milano, right, with the Biden, all of a sudden, believe all women was like, no. Now she's backpedaling because some women put her on blast.
We need to have this process of do right.
And then they're like, really, Alyssa? Yeah, and they were calling her out. Even I think Rose McGowan did too.
Rose McGowan took her to the mat, dude. If she was in MMA, she'd have had her choked out and stretched out and she'd been patting the floor.
And that's why I say, I didn't really even know Rose McGowan, okay? I still don't really know about her very much, other than like these things I've seen. And I knew that she was like with the Me Too thing. But I'm like, mad respect. Just the fact that she is being legit.
She's being honest. She's saying if it's this way now, it's got to be this way. That's what truth is. And that's where I'm like, cool. Truth doesn't vary.
Right.
If it's true all the time.
Yeah. And so I think it's really encouraging to see people like her, people like P. Diddy.
Like my brother here starting this representative.
Get woke. You have Kanye West who's spoken out.
Yes.
You have, and Candace Owens is really kind of getting this thing moving too. So it's so cool to see people who are like, yeah, now. I'm thinking.
You got to think. Cool. And like I told you, this is what I did back in the 2016 election. I was home back in Alabama, and we were having these debates before the election. And I simply said to some of my family members, "That's okay. Let's do this test. I want you to take a sheet of paper and write your values, what you believe are right and wrong, down the middle. Just write your values, just bullet point. Okay. Now, on the top of the paper, on the right hand, put Republican. On the left side, put Democrat. Now, I want you to go down the list of values that you created and put a check under the party that best represents the values that you say are important to you." And I would watch them look at the paper. And this was true of everyone I did this with. And they would not put a check on the paper. And they go, "No, I know, I'm voting Republican." I'm like, I'm not telling you to vote Republican. I'm telling you to identify the party that represents your values. Right. They can't do it. And it's like that, it's that disconnect that allows us to get away from truth. We don't let truth be the monitor of our actions. And that's what I find to be so disturbing, that we have allowed ourselves constructed in ourselves this artificial barrier that says, "Oh, I believe this to be true, but I can act over here." We call that hypocrisy. And so when we do that in the real world, we're back to shooting holes in our own canoe.
Right.
And we don't understand. If you look, and this especially black people. Now, here's the canoe I want you to look at. Look at the condition of the black family since the 1940s. At one time, one of the highest, most solid base of the middle class American family was the black family. One of the lowest rates of out of wedlock births, black family. Now we're the highest. Abortion. Look at the devastating toll abortion's taken on the black family. Fatherless homes, prison, incarceration. Black men used to go to prison because they were black. That was a fact.
Right.
Now they're going to prison because they're selling crack and shooting and killing each other.
And then they happen to be black, and then people say it's because they're black. I'm like, do you think it's not because he killed somebody?
They used to go to jail because they were black. That was a thing.
Right.
That was a thing. We had a saying when we were little, you knew go to jail, you go in there, for jaywalking and wind up committing suicide with a belt you never had.
Got suicided.
Folks killing themselves with belts they couldn't even afford to have. But so things like that did happen.
Right.
But historically they happened. But contemporarily, what we're talking about now, people are going to jail because they're committing crimes. We've said it in our last program. The leading cause of death among young black men is young black men.
Right.
It's not white supremacy or white privilege. It's not racial hatred. It's black men who are pulling the trigger on other black men. It's black men who are selling their sisters and their mothers and girlfriends into prostitution.
Right.
It's black men who are bringing crack into the community and turning it into a war zone. It's not some imaginary
it goes
enemy.
down.
It's the man in the mirror that's doing it.
It's culture.
Yes.
And the values of a people group in a society. And what gets me is so Jackie Perry kind of getting to that identity politics, and even Benjamin Watson, another believer.
Yeah, I was so disappointed with that.
The thing is, he's a believer, and I believe he knows the Lord and loves the Lord, but he even gets into the same
identity
thing,
politics,
particularly when it comes to black issues.
Yes.
And I'm like, okay, y'all, you say, and even Jackie Perry, she said this thing, and I'm like, okay, you're saying something, but you're doing the opposite.
Right.
She said, I think we need more critical thinking. People are just emoting, and they're not thinking critically. I'm like, I agree.
See, the problem here is when you're black in America, you have this pressure to conform. I feel it all the time. When I'm talking to my black friends, it's like, if you disagree with the party line, it's like, it's that pressure.
And then they want to take your card,
black
card.
And it's like, no, you have to stop and think. You have to be a critical thinker as a way of life.
Right.
Not just when it comes to issues that is safe to talk about.
Right.
And when you do that, I mean, people like I was saying Benjamin Watson. The pressure that he has to be feeling at his position is enormous. And so to be able to capitulate a little bit in his mind, I can see that.
Right.
Where it's like, okay, I'll take this pressure off so you guys are still like me. So I'm still one of you. We're still together. I'm not what we would erroneously call Uncle Tomming, but that pressure to compile, I know what he's talking about.
But then I actually think he believes it. That's what I'm saying. I don't think it's necessarily just a pressure.
No. The pressure is real. That's what I'm trying to say to you.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is I think
real.
he actually believes what he's saying.
Because it's real. Because at this point we stop thinking.
Right.
How many times I talked to even my people we talk to in our family, we start talking about things, and the minute you start talking, make it political, it's like there's this belief system that goes into place.
But it trumps everything.
That's contradictory to everything else they've said.
Crazy.
And that's what I'm saying. It's that. So what we understand when you talk about culture is what was called is normative.
Right.
Culture tells you what is right and wrong, what's normal. Now, whether it's right or wrong or not is irrelevant. But culture tells you, it makes you believe that these things are right or wrong.
Right.
So there's a way to conduct yourself if you're in prison. There's a culture of prison that if you don't live according to that culture, you're going to die painfully.
And
really
so
bad.
Perhaps it is the fear of losing that black identity.
It's all of it wrapped in.
Yeah.
It's wrapped in so tight. That's what we're saying when we talk about people. When you saying coming out of this, it is so. It's like unraveling a woolen blanket. You talk about the lady last time who said,
that just came to my mind.
Crying.
And I said that's supposed to be why, because
that pressure.
And it's a pressure, and I think it's like for her it is almost like this, for lack of a better word, almost like a death, where she can't share that with the people in her community
because if
they don't get it.
You talk to people and you'll see it. This anger because, and I think it's an anger because there's a battle inside. That when you start talking about these issues with black people in particular, they are so threatened about losing their blackness. And that is so important, that this idea that if I disagree with this, I'm losing some part of my blackness, and that challenges them. So then the thinking stops.
But it's like, where did that come from?
But it stopped because it's been ingrained into us over the last 60 years.
It's like, you're not going to lose it.
It's been very, very methodically. Well, see, you can't forget.
I think that has to come from the Democratic Party. That is like a lie from the liberals.
But you can't. It goes even deeper than that. You see, this is what we have to remember. The Democratic Party is the face of the evil that we're dealing with. It's not the source of the evil. The enemy is Satan. Always Satan at the end. And he is the destroyer, the enemy of men's souls. And he doesn't care what lie he tells. He doesn't care what you believe. He doesn't care whether he makes this guy a millionaire, if he can use his millionaire position to destroy millions of people. He doesn't care. That's why you'll see these people grow up, blow up, and flame out, because he doesn't care.
Right.
He'll give you let you get all these things. Jesus said what? What profited a man to gain the whole world and lose his soul? And that's what we see, especially in the black community, is that we've been gaining the world, but we're losing our soul, and we're losing our families. We're losing our sons and our daughters. We're losing our true identity. And it comes back down to, who are we? And as far as the church is concerned, the answer to that question must be, I am a Christian first.
Right.
I've asked so many, especially my black friends, I've asked them, how do you identify as a person, as an American? Do you identify as a Baptist, a Lutheran, or a Assembly of God, or a Christian? How do you identify? As a Republican, as a Democrat? And inevitably they'll say, well, I'm a Christian first. And then I'll say, then everything else has to be informed by that. How do you go forward? And that's where the conversation usually dies.
Right.
Because it's like,
well, and I think it goes back to, and it's actually like, I think it is this deep, honestly, because I think everything comes back to this in life. Like, we were talking to a neighbor we ran into on the street.
Yes.
And she had said something where I was like, ooh, that's so true. Where she said, for all of our lives, it really comes down to the question of, what will you do with Jesus?
What will you do with Jesus?
And that's what she said. And I'm like, I think that's so true. So that applies to everything. And so even in situations like that, where it's like, man, I have the fear I'm going to lose my identity. Well, yeah, you have to, because Jesus said, "Come and die," and we then come into His culture.
Only by dying can you truly live.
And that can be scary. I think it
is scary.
Yeah,
I'm just finished up reading this book called "A Prisoner and Yet," and it's a book that deals with some of the same issues that are covered in the book "The Hiding Place" by Corrie ten Boom. And the thing that she focuses on in this book, though, is her time exclusively in the prisons. It's just the day-to-day. What was that like? That she was a prisoner, and yet, and she talked about the fact that how, while she was there incarcerated in Ravensbrück prison, a German prison, a concentration camp in World War II, that she was enduring the hardships of this. And just the nastiness, the abuse, the humiliation, making these women walk around naked, stripping their clothes off, putting them outside in the winter, making them stand 4 or 5 hours out in the cold. I mean, just stuff they do, starving people to death, beating people to death. And she talks about how at one point they had to come in and out of this queue to go into their barracks, and there would be several hundred women. And this one compound, there was like 30,000 prisoners at one time. So it was a lot of people there. In their barracks alone, there was 1,400 women. And so to go in and out of this one point, they had this one point of access, they got egress. So they were trying to get in. So there's, at any given time, there was several hundred people in this doorway, and you'd be bam. She goes, and one day she's trying to get through there, and she's like, okay, Lord, I just want to get in so I can get to my bunk and rest a little bit. And she found herself pressed face to face with this other lady. And she looked at this lady in her face, and this lady had this look of despair, just utter despair. And she knew the lady, and she called her by name, and she said, Corrie, I can't take this anymore. I can't take living in this hell, not one more day, not one more day. And Corrie said they were pressed right next to each other, so neither one of them could move. And she looked at her. She grabbed this lady's arms, and she said, no, but Jesus can. Surrender yourself to Jesus. She said Jesus would not do it. She said, but you have to, because Jesus brought you here for a reason. And she's like, she goes, but you can, because Jesus in you can. And she said, and Corrie said, will you pray? She goes, I can't even pray. Pray for me. And so Corrie said she grabbed her hands, eyes wide open, pressed almost nose to nose with this woman. She begins praying. And she's like, Lord Jesus, we surrender ourselves to you in this situation. whatever you have for us, do it. We give ourselves over into your will. And she said, the woman looked at her and all of a sudden just this look of peace came. She goes, I see it. Jesus in me is my strength. Jesus in me. And so she went from being this despairing, I need to die, to I can serve Jesus even here in Ravensbrück.
Even a prisoner and yet.
And so here we are. Who do you identify as?
Right.
Are you identifying as a prisoner in Ravensbrück? Are you a prisoner of the Nazi regime? Are you a starving person how are you identified?
Right.
But if you identify as a child of God, even in this place, she talks about she had got released and she was waiting to get screened medically before she had to go. And there was this young girl, 15-year-old girl, who was kind of simple-minded and said she was just scary. She had all these open wounds when they had done these surgeries on her and stuff. They just so she said, I was afraid of her at first, but then I made friends with her. I started telling her about Jesus. And then she said the night before, I think it was the night before she had to leave, she asked the girl, so what do you know? And the little girl looked at her. She said, she had these big old eyes, she's starving. And, and she goes, I know that Jesus loves Oli. I think her name said, Jesus loves Oli. Jesus died so that Oli can live. He said, what else do you know? That if I die, I get to go to a place where Jesus is making a place for me. And she said, anything else? Yes. And when the mean people come and they hurt me and they're mean to me, I know that Jesus is greater than they are. And even if they kill me, that all they can do is send me to go be with Jesus.
Oh, that's going to be great.
And she's like, she goes, I knew then, because she had but stayed like a week in that place. And she's like, I knew then why God allowed me to stay there, because I needed to speak with Oli. And so again, a prisoner and yet, who do you identify as? Who do you identify as? What is your purpose and function in life? Identity politics breaks us down and makes us less than what we are.
And it makes us blind to the truth of the gospel.
It makes us less.
And what gets me is, even I was looking at, so I follow Blexit, right? And there's one guy, he goes by Kingface, and he started working with Candace Owens and Blexit movement. And even when he's talking, he said, he was being interviewed, and he's like, and I don't know him personally, I just know what he said. And he said, well, it was Jesus. He talked about how he's like, I believe in Jesus. And even that is putting him on the path to start and now he's less identified with, the politics of things.
Right.
Granted, yes, he's moving more towards that conservative value. But it really did start with that decision when he's talking about Jesus.
Right.
So that's what it comes down to.
And so we come down here to the end again of another, delightful, intriguing, inspiring conversation. Just as we begin to review, again, just the realities. And if nothing else comes of this, I speak to our audience. If it was just, even if you decide that you don't agree with anything we say, at least have a logical reason for doing it. Be able to identify why you're doing it. Because I think that if you are logically pursuing truth, you will ultimately come to the reality of who Jesus is.
And that's because Jesus isn't hiding.
No.
I always go back to the fact that he says it is his desire that all men be saved.
All men.
So we're going to have ample opportunity to find him. If we're seeking for truth, you're going to find him.
All we got to do is yield.
Yeah.
All right, then. Hey, this brings us to, again, the end of another segment of Behind the Why. I hope you have found the conversation as intriguing as I have, and that you will be inspired, too, to not be identified with anything less. On one aspect, the political aspect, we have this great American melting pot, and yet we're starting to try to draw people apart back into their rudimentary parts instead of being this great new creation or experiment called this American dream. And on the other hand, we step way back and we lose out on life because Jesus is the way. He's the truth and the life. And when you don't go to Jesus, then you got nothing but darkness. So who wants to walk in the dark? Not me. I'm all about the light, y'all.
Yep.
All right. So, hey, like everything else, get behind the why. And until next time, know that God loves you. God bless you. Peace. We're out.